The morning I got arrested for stealing my own car, I was wearing my favorite Navy suit, the one I usually save for big hearings, and I honestly thought the worst thing that was going to happen that day was a late filing from opposing counsel. You know what I mean? That kind of normal annoyance, not your life turning sideways under a concrete overpass. I was driving the same route I always take into downtown Lakebridge Coffee and the cup holder case files on the passenger seat, running through arguments in my head about why this police department needed federal oversight for racial profiling and traffic stops. Because I had read the numbers, I had read the complaints, and I knew exactly how bad it was on paper. I just wasn't expecting to live it in real time. I remember seeing the red and blue lights pop up in my rearview mirror and thinking almost casually, maybe there's an ambulance behind me, maybe they're trying to get around because I wasn't speeding. My registration was up to date, both taillights were working. I had checked that out of habit more times than I can count, but those lights stuck right to my bumper and my stomach did that slow, cold drop that black drivers in this country know way too well. I pulled over under the Ironwood overpass, hands on the wheel, window down, every motion deliberate, because I've heard too many stories that start with it was just a normal stop and end with candles on a sidewalk. Officer Mark Delton came up to my window like the ending had already been decided, one hand resting on his holster for show, the other gripping a flashlight he absolutely did not need at 8:19 in the morning, and there was no, "Good morning, ma'am. Do you know why I pulled you over?" None of that, just, "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to step out of the vehicle right now," loud, sharp, meant for anyone driving by to hear. I kept my hands on the wheel and did what I've told 100 defendants to do from the bench. I narrate every move I said. "Officer, my name is Naomi Carter. I am a United States District Judge. My identification and registration are in my purse. I am going to reach for my purse now," and I moved slowly, pulled out my license, my federal ID, my registration, every document straight and clean. He glanced barely that quick, dismissive flick like the words on those cards didn't matter and said, "Got a report of a stolen vehicle matching this description," like he was reciting a line he'd already decided on in the car. And right on cue, his radio crackled. "Unit 214 plate comes back clean, registered to Carter, Naomi, Elise, no flags." And I watched his thumb roll the volume knob down like he was turning off a song he didn't like. In that moment, I felt this split inside me, the judge in me, ticking through the elements of an unlawful stop, the citizen in me very aware that my body was a lot more fragile than the Constitution I swore to uphold, and the black woman in me thinking, "Here we go again." I repeated myself as calmly as I could. "Officer, you have confirmation from dispatch that this vehicle is registered to me. I am on my way to court. I am scheduled to preside over a hearing at 9 a.m. And he leaned forward, breath visible in the cold air, and said it again, slower, like I was a child. "Ma'am, step out of the vehicle, or I will remove you myself." At that point, I knew this wasn't about a broken taillight or a stolen car. It was about power, and about a man who wanted me to understand he thought he had all of it. I opened the door like I've seen in training videos, one hand visible narrating, "I am stepping out of the vehicle now," and before my second foot hit the pavement, he grabbed my wrist and yanked hard, metal cuffs snapping around my wrists so fast and tight, the sound bounced off the concrete, and for a second I just stood there, hands pinned behind my back, thinking this is happening, this is actually happening. I am being arrested on the side of the road for driving my own car, with my own name on the registration. A couple cars slowed, people stared the way city people do. That mix of curiosity and distance, like they've seen this movie too many times already. But one man across the street in front of a little corner store froze with his keys in his hand and pulled out his phone. I didn't know his name yet, I'd learn it later, Arjun, but I saw the phone come up, saw that small red recording dot, and something in me relaxed, just a hair, because I knew at least one pair of eyes besides mine was going to remember exactly how this went. On his video, you can see Mark marching me toward the squad car, my shoulders back, my wrists digging into steel. You can hear my voice too calm for what's happening. "Officer, you are making a serious mistake," and you can hear his answer low, close to my ear. "The only mistake here is you thinking that badge in your wallet means anything under this bridge. Keep your voice down." And I felt this little flash of anger slice through the fear, because that wasn't just disrespect to me, that was contempt for the institution we both supposedly served. I took a breath, lifted my chin, and said, "No, I won't." Not shouting, not pulling away, just refusing to be smaller than he needed me to be, to make this feel normal. What I didn't know at that second was that about 2 blocks back, one of my old law school classmates, Assistant District Attorney Eric Nolan, had hit his brakes so hard his coffee spilled when he spotted my SUV and those flashing lights. He pulled onto the shoulder, blinked like he couldn't believe what he was seeing, and then did something I will always be grateful for. He didn't just walk up and argue with the officer. He took out his phone and hit go live, because he knew as well as I did arguing on a dark shoulder with a man whose hand loves his holster is a good way to get ignored or worse, but a live stream with a comment section full of witnesses, that's a whole different kind of pressure. I heard his voice before I saw him. If you're joining, this is Judge Naomi Carter being detained under the Ironwood overpass. She has identified herself. Dispatch has cleared the vehicle. They still have her in cuffs. And I turned my head, found his camera lens, and I remember my own voice sounding weirdly detached when I said, "Eric, document everything. Not help me, not get me out of here, just document," because in that moment I knew whatever happened next, we were building a record. Back at the courthouse, while my coffee was cooling on the front seat of a squad car, my clerk Tasha was watching the same live stream, staring at my face on a little screen where I was supposed to be standing in a courtroom. And she did the thing every good clerk dreams of never having to do. She called the Chief Judge's chambers and said, "Your Honor, this is Tasha Green, clerk to Judge Carter. She is being detained at Ironwood and Fifth. They are ignoring her ID. I am watching it live and hearing the Chief Judge's voice go very flat and quiet when she said, 'Find out who those officers are.' Keep this line open," told me later just how fast this entire situation was about to blow up. On the side of the road, though, before any of that backup arrived, a black SUV with a gold shield on the grille rolled up, and out stepped Sergeant Howard Pierce, 30 years on the job, the kind of man who thinks rank is a personality trait, and I saw it, the tiny flicker in his eyes when he recognized me. That split second where he knew exactly who I was, followed by the quick decision to pretend it didn't matter. He could have fixed it right there, could have said, "Judge Carter, there's clearly been a mistake. Let's get you uncuffed and on your way," and we would have had a very different story to tell. Instead, he leaned toward Mark, and in that performatively calm voice some men use when they want you to know they're in charge, said, "Proceed as you were, officer." And just like that, it wasn't one rogue cop anymore, it was a chain of command choosing to keep going. What they also didn't count on was who stepped out of the next patrol car. Lieutenant Elena Morales, someone I'd seen in files before as the rare name attached to reports that didn't end in shrugs. She walked up, eyes scanning everything, me in cuffs, Mark's posture, Howard's smug set to his shoulders, Arjun filming Eric live streaming traffic sliding past like none of this was unusual. And she didn't roll her eyes and keep walking like I've seen so many supervisors do. She reached up, tapped her body cam twice, felt the buzz that told her the audio was definitely live, and said, "Sergeant, what's your directive here?" in this calm professional voice that left him no room to play dumb. He said, "Routine." Stop, not quite looking at her, and she stepped in closer. She is a federal judge. Dispatch has cleared her vehicle twice. Why is she still in restraints? And that was the moment he muttered the words that would end his career, the ones he thought would vanish into cold air under a bridge. Make it look routine. Later, sitting in a metal chair inside the 7th Precinct lobby, wrists raw where the cuffs had been coat-folded neatly across my lap like we were all just waiting for a delayed meeting instead of the fallout from a civil rights violation. I watched them scramble to contain the story. I watched Howard lean over a junior officer's computer and hiss, "Pull the last 5 minutes of body cam, lock the system. No exports," like he was ordering a sandwich, casual and practiced. And I watched Officer Delton stare down at an incident report with the stiff posture of a man suddenly very aware that his version of events might not be the only one on record. Nobody said, "We're sorry." Nobody said we were wrong. They just moved paper and whispered like they could tape this thing back together. I stayed quiet, not because I was defeated, but because I wanted to remember every second. At the same time, in a back office, Elena Morales was replaying her own body cam footage, listening to make it look routine on loop, and she made a choice. A lot of people talk about and very few actually make. She burned a copy of that footage, slid it into a padded envelope, and wrote Andre Lewis Civil Rights Division, U.S. Department of Justice on the front, and instead of logging it like evidence that could mysteriously evaporate, she dropped it in outgoing federal mail and walked away, fully aware she had just stepped across a line she could never uncross. Tasha, meanwhile, had pulled Officer Delton's file and saw exactly what all those statistics had been trying to tell us for years. Complaints for racial profiling, unresolved use of force, repeated failure to activate body camera warnings, and then something worse. 17 phone calls in 10 days to a single number. a number that belonged to a former Lakebridge officer named Victor Hayes, a man I had sentenced to 7 years for beating a teenager during a traffic stop and lying about it on the stand. When she told me later that they had found Victor sitting in a car outside my house with binoculars and a burner phone messages open that said things like, "She took 7 years of my life, take something from her," I felt that cold of the overpass all over again, but it came with something else too, clarity. Because that was the twist. This wasn't just about one man's bias or ego, it was an organized act of retaliation. The hearing that followed felt less like a single case and more like putting the whole city on the stand. Another federal judge took the bench, so my courtroom stayed clean. Media lined the back wall, people from neighborhoods I'd only ever seen in case captions filled the gallery, and when I raised my right hand on the witness stand instead of behind the bench, I could feel every eye in that room waiting to see if I'd sound like a judge or like a person who just had her dignity dragged across concrete. I tried to be both. I walked them through the morning, the lights, the stop, the ignored ID, the dispatch clearance, the cuffs proceed, as you were Elena's body cam, and then I said the part that mattered most to me. What happened to me was not a mistake, it was a choice inside a pattern I have seen in case after case from this department, and I watched that sink in. Eric testified about why he went live instead of just arguing on the roadside. "Because the truth needed witnesses," he said, and I saw a couple jurors nod, like they'd watched their own feeds blow up with similar videos. Arjun, hands folded tight, told them he was scared to pull out his phone, but he did it anyway, because if nobody records it, they can say anything they want later, and Elena explained calmly why she mailed the footage out of the department. Because the law either applies to all of us, or it doesn't apply to any of us, and I wasn't going to be part of lying about what we all saw. And somewhere between her saying that and Andre pressing play on the raw body cam audio, you could feel the room shift. They heard it all. My voice identifying myself, dispatch saying my car was clean, the cuffs, the whisper make it look routine. And then they saw the text messages from Victor to Mark projected on a screen. "She took 7 years of my life. Take something from her and let me tell you there is a special kind of silence that falls when everyone in a room realizes they can never again pretend something was just a misunderstanding." After that, the consent decree was almost inevitable years of federal monitoring over Lakebridge PD, new rules for traffic stops, body cam requirements with actual consequences, a complaint system that couldn't just bury files in a drawer when the names on them were inconvenient. Mark lost his badge, his certification, and the right to call himself a police officer anywhere in this country, and he later stood in a different courtroom and heard the words "guilty of depriving someone of their rights under color of law." And for the first time, I think he understood that the uniform that once felt like armor could also be used as evidence. Howard was pushed into retirement with a demotion and a note in his file that turned his name into a cautionary slide in officer training about what leadership failure looks like. And Victor, the man who wanted to take something from me, got exactly the opposite of what he wanted: more years behind bars, and the bitter knowledge that his little revenge plot had ended up strengthening the very system he hated. 6 months later, my city looked the same on the surface, same skyline, same traffic, same gray skies most mornings, but when the first federal monitoring report came out, the numbers told a different story. Racial profiling complaints in traffic stops were down. Body cam compliance had finally hit the percentage. It was supposed to be at years ago. Supervisors had to sign off on every intuition-based stop and put actual words on paper about why it was necessary, and community meetings were louder, messier, but more honest because people started to believe just a little that if they spoke up, somebody outside that blue wall was finally listening. They built a new training center with classrooms on constitutional policing and use of force, and they named one of the lecture halls after me, which still feels strange to say out loud. But when I stood at the podium on opening day and looked out at all those new recruits in pressed uniforms, I realized I didn't want them to remember me as the judge who got stopped. I wanted them to remember the lesson that came out of that humiliation. So I told them, justice usually doesn't show up in one big dramatic moment. It shows up in 100 small decisions that nobody is filming in. Whether you turn your camera on, in whether you tell the truth, when it would be easier to lie, and whether you see the person in front of you as a threat or a human being, and I meant every word. Now, whenever I drive under that overpass, I still feel a little knot in my chest. I still remember the cold air and the sound of handcuffs and the way people slowed down to look and then kept driving. But I also remember Arjun's shaky hands holding a phone, Eric's voice saying, "This is Judge Carter," Elena's fingers tapping her body cam, Tasha scrolling through records, Andre hitting play on, "Make it look routine," And I think if all of that had happened to a nurse or a warehouse worker or a kid with a backpack instead of a federal judge in a Navy suit, would the outcome have been the same? Would anyone have listened, or did this city only change because this time they picked the wrong person to treat like a suspect? That's the part that still keeps me up sometimes, and that's the question I want to leave with you. If you've ever watched a routine stop that didn't feel routine at all, if you've ever been on the receiving end of that tone that says, "I'm in charge and your rights don't matter," I want you to tell your story. Drop it in the comments, tell me what you think. Do you believe what happened in Lake Bridge counts as real reform? Or did the system just flinch because the cameras were rolling and the target wore a robe? And if you want more stories that dig into this kind of messy, uncomfortable truth hit, like, subscribe, share this with someone who still thinks filming doesn't change anything. Because in my case, it changed everything.